To the Black girl who has ever tried to heal in the same places that hurt you, I see you. Hey, it's Kaylin, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is the Black Girl Scene podcast. Welcome back to our series on being seen in love and relationships, especially in the month of February. We're thinking Black History Month. We're thinking Black women. We're thinking love, Valentine's Day, Galentine's Day. If you've been listening all month, we started off with feeling more seen in dating and romance. Then we kind of added to that topic with a really dope talk with Dr. Ayanna Abrams, talking about boundaries. And next week, we're going to round it off with Harani Argo, a licensed professional counselor who's going to talk to us about being seen in our bodies for National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. So I am super excited for all of this wonderful content landing, hopefully in your inboxes, as well as on your podcast platforms and maybe your visual platforms as well. But this week, I wanted to talk about something that I don't think we usually give direct attention to. We loop it in there, but I think we just say relationships, and then we might kind of point to the family part, but we don't always make room for talking about feeling seen or unseen in our families. I think it's really hard to discuss how our relationship dynamics in adulthood with partners, with friends, even in the workplace, how those things unfold without acknowledging some of the most formative relationships in our life, which might be our families of origin in our early childhood circumstances. Now, family can mean a lot of different things to different people. So, to kind of get us on one page, I want to say that I'm seeing you if your family dynamic doesn't look like a quote unquote traditional family dynamic. I'm really referring to our primary attachments. And for some people, maybe that does feel a little bit more traditional, even if it looked maybe different from your neighbors. But for some of us, maybe we didn't grow up with our biological family members. Maybe we grew up with different families over time. Maybe our families changed over time. Maybe there are people we consider to be family who, on paper or according to certain cultures, we wouldn't see it as family. Some of us also maybe don't identify as having family. And I think all of that is valid. And I kind of want to position us into understanding that maybe there's a set of people, a set of humans, or even one person who you knew was primarily responsible for your caregiving over the years, and the way those relationships unfolded over time have impacted you. So I see you in whatever your story looks like, however your story started, however it evolved over time. And I hope that we can make room to talk about how that's landed with you today so that we can make some empowering decisions about what we want it to look like moving forward. That said, I think this topic can be really loaded, and I want us to take care of ourselves as we listen. I also think it can be easy to dismiss this topic. We can think of it as something that happened so long ago, something that shouldn't impact us anymore, especially depending on if we're building our own families right now. And maybe it can feel less important to navigate the families we quote unquote came from. I think it's important to acknowledge, though, that some of us got hurt in our families. Some of us experienced painful things as children in family and caregiving dynamics that are worth naming, and it matters. Even the families that we probably consider to be the good ones or mostly healthy, there still might be experiences that we carry with us that inform how we show up as people. And I want to make room for one, acknowledging that it happened, making space. I think sometimes we just don't do that. It's another form of avoiding some challenging emotions. And I think it's also helpful because if we look at our histories and our history with our families, that can help shape how we understand how we function today and help us take some power back as we figure out how we would like to move forward. So let's get into it. So when we think about family dynamics, family stuff, I literally could probably put out all 52 weeks of the year's worth of podcasts to cover this topic. So I want to name that there are so many different experiences we may have had growing up that left us feeling painful. And there are a few that I want to hone in on, or at least a couple of domains that I want to land on that I think really create the experience of feeling unseen in our families. I think for some of us, we might be thinking back on this, but for some of us, this is happening now. For some of us, we are still in contact with our families. We may have a certain flavor of communication or engagement with our families. And so these things might be very, very present and prevalent in our lives now and not just a distant memory. So this is for all of us. This is for those of us who are maybe working through some things that happened in the past and it's not as present to us now, or for some of us who feel like we're actually still in the mix of it. We're still in the throes of it. So when we think back to things that happened growing up, I know so many of my clients, even so many people in my life, might ask, what's the point? What's the point? It happened already. Let's move on. In some ways, absolutely. Let's be present in today. Let's think about tomorrow. And similar to why we learn history in the first place so that we don't repeat it, wink, wink, thinking on like a sociopolitical stage, it's also really important that we build awareness and true connection to how we got here. I also think it's okay, important, and very sacred to hold space for what has happened to you. And for those of us who maybe struggle to attach to why it's even helpful to look back, I wanted to name that. That said, there can be a lot of grief work done here. Grief is not reserved just for when someone passes away. Grief is about loss, period. And you're right that it's really challenging to think back on something that we can't change. That's the grief, recognizing that something did happen and it did impact us and we can't go back and change it. And because a lot of us don't do that grief work, it can be really, really hard to actually separate from it over time, right? We say we're over it, but what we're really saying is we're not wanting to process it or integrate it into our lives in a way where we can move forward meaningfully. And again, I love to remind people when it feels really hard to connect with why we want to look back on our past, ask yourselves what life would have been like had some of those family members done this work. Had some of them thought back to what they experienced, what they went through, maybe they would have handled and shown up for you differently. So, if that can inspire some willingness to do this, I hope that plants a seed. So, I want to get into about 4 general domains. These are not fixed, these are not exact, but they are different areas that I tend to categorize when I'm thinking about different familial experiences that might lead to certain functions of feeling unseen. I also want to name that this is not punching bag to the family unit episode, right? Like we can acknowledge that maybe we had these unmet needs in childhood while also holding compassion, empathy, and understanding for our families or our caregiver units, our early starts in life. We can still do both. So I want to name that because it can feel really challenging to put language to some of the things that we didn't get without feeling like we're blaming someone. This isn't about blaming, it's about naming. So the first domain that kind of stands out for me is and I'll name them by the core beliefs and then the experiences that I think are behind them. So the first core belief I'd say is feeling unsafe. And I think that's really connected to being seen because if we don't feel safe, we likely won't feel seen. And if we don't feel seen, we don't feel safe, right? All of those pieces feel connected. And that could be connected to experiences of feeling underprotected or not provided for. So this might be where you grew up with less than enough, where maybe there wasn't always food on the table, the lights weren't always on, or we weren't in secure housing, or maybe left in dangerous situations, or maybe that your caregiver units didn't want to show up for you in these ways. Maybe it did. We don't know. We just want to acknowledge that this was your experience. So this is less about blaming anyone. This is more about owning your experiences. This also could fit really well for emotional neglect. So I think sometimes we think just about neglect being like someone didn't feed you. And maybe if someone didn't feed you emotionally or there was an emotionally abusive person in the caregiver unit and you didn't feel protected from them, those still all fit, which is why I wanted to name that these categories are not fixed. It's not you get one experience and then you have one wound and then that's it. It's not that clean. I wish it was, but I did want to offer some perspective on how sometimes we might arrive at the core beliefs and the woundings that we walk around with. The next core belief area that tends to stand out for me is the I am not enough and the I am not wanted. And I actually think these are really hallmark core beliefs that I think a lot of us struggle with at some point in our lives. And I think sometimes these can become the bigger roots to even all the other core beliefs. But this to me feels very connected to an experience of feeling undervalued or rejected. So this can be your abandonment. This can be emotional neglect as well. This can also be maybe you didn't feel like someone prioritized you. Maybe you felt like caregivers were choosing others over you, or maybe didn't pay enough attention to you. So all of those pieces, maybe a lot of criticism coming your way. And so you just continually receive the message that you weren't enough, that you weren't doing enough, all these different pieces that can come together to have us challenge our value. Next is the I am bad, something's wrong with me. Maybe even I am dirty, depending on what this might be connected to. This can be connected to experiences of harm, feeling over criticized or violated. Why did I put criticized next to harm? Because the level of criticism and the type of criticism can still very much be connected to forms of psychological and emotional abuse. And so I think it's important for you to know. It also can be that you just genuinely feel and have had an experience around being told that you are not a good person in one way or another. So this is a bit of a clumped category. And I continually want to remind everyone to take care of themselves if they're listening to this podcast, and remembering that it can be really helpful to put language to, I might be struggling with some of these wounds around effectiveness, when in reality, I was around those who did not have the capacity to treat me with care. And so it wasn't communicated to me that it's not me. And so I want to hold space for that. And lastly, I think one that feels, and these all feel so connected, but they're precise in their own ways, is the I am not important or the I don't matter core beliefs. And that can be very connected to ultimately being under nurtured, under prioritized, sometimes even ignored, just not feeling like you were in the count either way. Sometimes even when we're and I think this is a helpful experience to name, sometimes when we have siblings and certain siblings get more attention than us, even if that attention is not positive, even if that sibling was actually the source of a lot of tension, conflict, or they were the recipient of harmful treatment, there can still be a manifestation in you that you're not as important, or that you are supposed to be quieter, smaller, in a corner in relation to this other sibling for whatever reason. And so I know that was probably really heavy to hear and to listen through, but I think it's really important that we connect some dots, like I said, so that we can ask ourselves a little bit more powerfully in our current lives why we might show up the way that we do. And again, if I were to get deeper into this, I would get all into the different family and roles and the family therapy schemas and all of that. I'd talk about our scapegoats and our peacekeepers and really get into it. But I'm going to keep it precise today because I just want us to get in the habit of really building some strong connection points with what happened to us versus how we are now. So when we have these experiences and we have these unmet needs, chances are when we grow up, we are primarily seeking to get our needs met outside of the family units, outside of the caregiver units. Typically, when we think about our relationships today, we are often looking for what we didn't get in childhood. So, for example, in order to accommodate or to compensate for our unmet needs in childhood, it's very possible that we then took on these family roles in order to meet those needs, right? Responsibilities got placed on us that weren't actually appropriate for us as children, whether it's practical and actual caretaking of younger siblings or of the house, or emotional. And that might be something that we still do to this day. We still take on responsibilities that are not ours. We still overfunction emotionally or otherwise for other people, right? So that's a clear line between I was parentified as a child and now I don't really know how to be anything but the leader, right? You maybe took on a role of peacekeeping. Maybe you were in a home that was very chaotic. Maybe people were always in conflict. And the way you felt safe was to keep the peace, was to mediate, was to bring joy and light to everyone. And now maybe that's still how you function. Maybe you still don't do conflict. You don't like it. It doesn't feel good. It's triggering to you, whether you see it that way or not. Sometimes we just think, I just don't do that. That's just not me. And we don't realize maybe we actually can do conflict, but we never built the capacity or the skills to show up more fully because we didn't learn it before, right? Maybe we became the mascot. Maybe we became the comic relief, right? And again, I don't want to pathologize how we show up in life. I absolutely built a lot of my own inclinations as a caring and a caregiving type of person and a therapist from a lot of what I experienced. And I think some of it is a temperament thing. Like we kind of just are who we are. So I think we gravitate toward our roles, if you will, quote unquote, based off of, a lot of who we are. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's okay that maybe some of what we went through inspired how we show up now. And how can we make sure that as we carry this on, it's not showing up in ways with unintended consequences. So, for example, it is okay if this has become my profession, but it's not okay if I were showing up in all my relationships as the therapist. One, that's unethical. And two, how does that really actually serve me in relationships if all my relationships look that way? That may or may not be an actual question that I need to answer or continue to ponder. And I hope that normalizes for us that we're all often negotiating, like, how do I show up in a way that feels true to me, that honors who I really am, and maybe even what I've been through without it being a thing that gets in the way of me getting my needs met. And I think that's something else to think about with these family roles and these core wounds, beliefs, behaviors that come out of that. They worked at some point. It works for me to understand how people feel. That's a big way of how I stay safe. It works for a lot of us to overfunction. These things are actually functional. And over time, long term in adulthood, there are unintended consequences. Sometimes, even as kids, there are unintended consequences. A lot of us might relate to having certain concerns, friendship problems, boyfriend, girlfriend, dating problems, even maybe leadership problems, bullying, even anxiety, depression. Like these things are not off limits for kids. And sometimes it doesn't show in the same ways as it does when we get older and we get out of the family unit. So, again, it's not to pathologize anything. We don't want to, say that our family is the whole reason why everything's wrong, unless that feels good for you. But we also don't want to completely dismiss it and act like it just shouldn't matter anymore. We don't want to act like, okay, everything I do is because of my family. So that means that's not who I am. And we want to confront how that shows up in our life so that it doesn't take control of our lives. Balance. I do think balance is a myth, but I do think it's still a good word to use here. Nuance, right? Kind of holding space for all these conflicting truths. And so, what do we do with this information? What do I do with knowing that I probably am perfectionistic because I'm so used to solving everyone's problems and that was the way I stayed safe? What do I do with knowing that I was a quieter person because staying in a corner kept me out of harm's way? And so now it's harder to show up and feel seen in my life. What do I do with the fact that I was scapegoated and everyone always saw me as the bad person and I really embodied that? And now I want to show up more fully as myself, but I don't feel like there is anything else to grow into. This is all I know. First of all, I see you. It's really hard. I think this is our life's work. I think that there's so many pieces of us that get handed to us. There's so many moments that we go through that we didn't choose. And I feel deep empathy for all of us. I don't know if this feels helpful to some of us who are listening, but when we talk about things like abuse, when we talk about things like trauma, I think it can feel like those are the only things that leave scars. And again, maybe there was a really big moment in your life, or maybe there was a repeated experience of feeling ignored. All of those things are valid and they matter. And it is really hard across the spectrum of painful experiences to sit with the pain of what that was like and then choose to live from a place of trust and a place of possession and showing up in ways that actually feel true and good to you. That is our life's work. So I hope that you can hold some compassion for yourself as you sit with this. I also think, kind of getting back to the root of this podcast, is it's important to be the witness that you didn't have and ask yourself, how do I want to navigate my family dynamics today? So we learned a lot more about how and why we show up the ways that we do. And that might still be happening. Some of us may not be in touch with our families. Maybe some of us, we are still going to Sunday dinner every week. Maybe some of us don't identify as having a family. Maybe some of us are looking for a family. Maybe some of us are looking for family that we know exists that we don't have contact with. I want to hold space for all of it. And I think it's important that you actually sit with, how did all that impact me and what do I need now? Very oversimplified, but very important. How did that impact me and what do I need now? Right? I think something that can be really important to think about sometimes is, how do you feel like you keep playing out similar dynamics with your family today that you did when you were younger? Are you the youngest sibling and you just still don't feel listened to or respected? Are you the oldest sibling and you still think everyone is putting all of their expectations on you or everything is your responsibility? Are you maybe a middle sibling or someone in the middle and you don't feel as seen, you don't feel as noticed or respected either? Are you building and working on your own family and it feels really hard to set boundaries with the family you grew up with? All of these things are really valid to question and connect with. And I think in order to get to that answer, we have to ask ourselves really how we were impacted and what we need now. And so, in some of those examples, if you are an oldest sibling, which I really have come to understand that a lot, this podcast in this space speaks a lot to the oldest daughters or the only daughters of the family, because a lot falls on you. And we've talked a lot about how and why that happens. And I think if you know that your wound is around being a third parent, being a stand in parent, being a caregiver, being the emotional container, being the person, being the rock or the glue, just holding so much weight, maybe you know you need relief. Maybe you know that you don't want to keep doing this dance. And it might be important to ask yourself what that really looks like. That might involve a lot of grief work. It might feel really scary to think, well, what happens to my aging family if I do less? Can you tolerate the discomfort that maybe there is a trade off and maybe you're worth that trade off? Maybe there's a way that you can still honor what feels important to you, right? These are still all values that you hold, but maybe you can honor how you show up for your family without completely depleting yourself. Maybe you're someone who doesn't feel very respected or doesn't feel like your family sees you as your own operating person. And maybe it's time to ask you, when are you going to give yourself permission to be an independently operating person? And how can you show up in that? Right. So these are things that, if you haven't kind of connected that dot by now, it's really helpful to do in the space of a healing professional. It absolutely takes time to do. And some of us already know. Some of us already know that we don't want to do our family holidays this year, that we don't want to feel like we have to buy everyone a birthday gift. Maybe some of us know that we wish that we could talk to our families more. And we wish that they were more present for us, that they were always kind of distant, and you actually do want that experience. So I want to invite you to connect more honestly with what you need. And this is more than just figuring out what you need from your family of origin, your caregiver family of origin. This is also to help you contextualize what you need from all your relationships right now. Maybe there are ways that you've been seeking things from your family of origin that you actually can get met in the family that you're building or the family that you're choosing. And I really want to talk about chosen families. I'm going to go a little bit more into it toward the end, but we really do choose our families. And that doesn't just mean the people that are, not biologically related to us or a part of our family networks from childhood. I think that means that you have the right to grow up and recognize that you have a cousin that you didn't really spend a lot of time. I mean, that's what happened to me, even over the last couple of years. There's a couple of cousins in particular that I was like, I'm gonna spend more time with them. And I was like, oh wait, no, you're my cousin. Like, you are my cousin. Like, I choose this relationship in a way that maybe before it wasn't as much of a choice. It was just, I see you when the family events happen. I see you when these things unfold. And now it's like I get to really choose. And maybe there's some other family members that you're not making the cut. You don't feel safe. You're not someone I want in this space. So in all of these iterations, we get to choose and we really get to make space for what feels like the family we need. And as we continue to address and show up differently with our actual families, it's really, really likely that it's going to spill over into other areas of our life. If we finally have the strength to set a boundary with a parent who for years, it was so easy to fold. It was so easy to give them whatever it is that they asked for. It was so easy to rescue them from feeling uncomfortable. then we and we like finally set a boundary there, then we are probably a little more confident going into other relationships. Not always. So I don't want it to seem like, okay, you set a boundary with dad, so now you can just set boundaries with everybody. Not necessarily. And it's a really great start. It's a really powerful start. And it really sometimes paints a picture and encourages us to keep going. So when you're thinking about this, I think the internet has gotten a hold of conversations around estrangement and no contact. I don't always love how they talk about it, but it is important to name that you do get to choose if you want your family in your life or not. And of course, that's a heavy decision that I really want to support you to make in the presence of the right supports, the right community, the right healing professionals. And I want to present to us that there's a spectrum of contact with anyone, but especially our family, that we get to decide where we want to land. We can go no contact. We can close that door. We also can go low contact. We can know that someone is in our life and we have very specific ways that we interact with them. That's okay too. We also can change our minds. We can try the low contact thing, realize it's not working, and decide to go no contact. We also sometimes in our life might recognize that going no contact was for a season, and maybe if it makes sense to you and you have supports and you feel safe enough, you may decide to revisit a relationship that you originally closed the door to. None of these things have to be permanent, and I invite you to be mindful around, do I need to be deciding, how to set a boundary with XYZ family member or XYZ time of the year? Or do I need to be deciding how much I'm interacting with them at all? Do I need to be deciding if it's important for them to be present in my life? All in all, I think it's really important that we don't just settle for my family feels this way, I feel this way, and like that just is the way it is. I think it can be really powerful at our quote unquote big ages. I don't think our ages are that big, but I do, I know we say that. But at this point in our life, at this stage in our life, to really take the power we have to make decisions around what we really need. What protection you needed at 8 years old is just as valid at 38. The love and attention and nurturing you didn't get at 12 is just as important at 20. The disappointments, the disrespect, all of that you experienced when you first went to college is still important as you're turning 50. All of these things still matter to you and still matter to the grander story of who you're becoming. And I hope that you make room for checking in around, if I'm thinking about love in my life, I'm thinking about feeling loved in my life, can it be okay that I actually challenge myself? That this applies to the people who, quote unquote, their blood, their family, so you should be okay no matter what. Maybe blood is not thicker than water. Which brings me to my last point, that chosen family, I think sometimes we use that term to kind of really explicitly state that you have this biological family and then everyone else. Again, I think chosen family is something that we all have. I think it's true for when we have friendships that are really powerful, when we say, you are my sister, you are my brother, you are my girl, you are my person. I think it's true when we choose the loves of our lives. I think it's true when we choose our mentors. I think it's true when we choose our chosen children to nurture and to mentor. I think anytime we build community and we build relationship, we're choosing family. So I think it's important to say that as you think about the family you were quote unquote given, or kind of that you didn't get to choose, that every step of the way, you are still continuing to choose your family, and you get to lean into that and shape that in the ways that feel best to you. So I know that probably felt like a really big blanket conversation around families and how we maybe got hurt in our homes and how we can heal outside of these homes. And I really want to name that it is just such brave work to do this. If you are making the tough choice to go no contact, I see you. If you are making the hard choice to write that letter, to speak to that parent, to tell them how you feel, that is not easy. I see you. If you are repairing with a sibling, I see you. If you are managing changes in life with your siblings, I see you. If you are really doing the work to undo all the ways you learned to disappear yourself, to make yourself small because of how you had to do it with your family, I see you. Like, none of this is easy. None of this is easy. And I wanted to kind of create room for us to really, really acknowledge that when we're talking about building love in our lives, we cannot ignore the sources of love from the beginning, albeit if it was actually safe or if it was enough. And I think if you know it wasn't enough, it wasn't safe, or it's something that you've had to do a lot of growth through, I really commend you for naming that and giving yourself permission to sit with that and grow out of that in this season of your life. So to take us home, I want to offer that we really make room to journal about this. Like, maybe don't just sit and think, okay, yeah, this made me become a people pleaser and now I'm a people pleaser and I should probably stop doing that. Okay, cool. Like, can we really get a little more granular? Can we really get in touch with what actually unfolded and has impacted us moving forward and how we want to change that? And again, this is not do the journal, move on. This is long-term work. And if we get into a practice of sitting with this, connecting those dots, giving ourselves permission to revisit that, I really wonder how that might start to show up in our lives moving forward in ways that are really powerful. So I hope you really liked this episode. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And in the show notes, there's a link to get subscribed to the Scene Sunday newsletter, where I share additional thoughts about the topic of the week. And I'm always alerting you when the next episode airs. So share the love and come back to this whenever you need a reminder or a good hug. And with that being said, to the Black girl who is doing the sacred work of building the family you truly want and deserve, I see you. And as always, I hope you feel loved in the ways that heal. Until next time, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Girl Scene podcast. This podcast is meant for information purposes only and is not meant to substitute for medical advice. Although I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast does not establish a clinical relationship with you, the listener, nor does it replace a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. For more information and resources on finding a therapist or support, please visit www.blackgirlscene.com/support.